Honorable Bradley Felix, Minister for Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, Mr. Leo Titus Breville, Permanent Secretary of the Department of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs, Ms. Peggy Ann Sudat, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Department of Commerce, Ms. Camille Wildman, Project Officer, Private Sector Specialist, European Union Delegation to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS and CARIFORUM, Mr. Adam Wisniewski, First Secretary, Trade Affairs Manager, European Union Delegation to Barbados, Ms. Virginia Paul, Head, Trade Policy Unit, OECS Commission, Ms. Alison Francis, Services Specialist of Caribbean Export Development Agency, Ms. Andrina Simon, Senior Client Manager of the Trade Export Promotion Agency, Mrs. Lucienne Mason of the Embassy of France to the OECS Member States and Barbados, Ms. Stephanie Puja Tika, Project Manager of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Martinique, heads of departments of the Department of Commerce, representatives of other government agencies, other business support organizations, private sector partners, St. Lucian and other OECS participating firms, specially invited guests, representatives of the Government Information Service, other members of the media, I bid you all a happy and pleasant good morning. The Department of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development and Consumer Affairs warmly welcomes you to this CARIFORUM-EU Economic Partnership Agreement Workshop and Regional Business-to-Business Strategic Networking Forum. This important trade-focused initiative forms part of activities in observance of Business Month under the theme Promoting an Entrepreneurial Culture, Innovation and Creativity. This workshop is being delivered in collaboration with the Caribbean Export Development Agency, the EU Delegation to Barbados, the OECS Commission, and the Trade Export Promotion Agency. On this note, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to invite Ms. Camille Wildman, Project Officer, Private Sector Specialist of the European Union Delegation to Barbados, to deliver some remarks.
Honorable Minister, Permanent Secretary and Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ms. Francis and Ms. Paul, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I have a confession to make. I had no idea it was this nerve-wracking to be the opening batsman. So if you hear a little nervous tremor in my voice, please forgive me. Thank you for your invitation to participate in this workshop in collaboration with the Government of St. Lucia, the Caribbean Export Development Agency, and GIZ. The CARIFORUM European Union Economic Partnership Agreement, which will be the focus of our deliberations today, is the culmination of decades of a very fruitful relationship between the EU and the Caribbean Forum of the African, Caribbean, Pacific countries. This relationship has undergone a deliberate progression under successive Yaoundé and Lomé conventions, from one of predominantly development cooperation to that of increasing economic trade cooperation and political dialogue. The Cotonou Agreement, signed in 2000, signaled the start of a more comprehensive partnership in which there was equality in terms of ownership, mutual obligations, and participation. For the first time, civil society or non-state actors were included, not only in the dialogue, but also in the implementation of the agreement and all its related policies and programs. The signature of the EPA in 2008 ushered in the first North-South trade agreement that promotes sustainable development towards the elimination of poverty as well as supports a higher level of regional integration as a vehicle towards a seamless and deeper integration into the global economy. The EPA, as you may be aware, details how the two regions will cooperate on a wide range of trade-related issues, including duties charged on imports of goods, the market standards they're required to meet, trade in services, and related policy areas such as competition policy and intellectual property rights. The EPA will slowly and progressively open up trade in goods between the two parties. This will occur immediately for CARIFORUM goods exported to the EU and gradually for EU goods exported to CARIFORUM countries. As with the CARIFORUM-EU relations, our successful cooperation with the government and people of St. Lucia has also matured over time. Over the past 2 or so decades, millions of euros in grant financing have been provided to St. Lucia by the European Union. Much earlier in the cooperation, some of these resources represented compensation for losses in earnings for bananas exported to the EU as a result of fluctuations in price and/or quantities. This program was known as STABEX. As it became clear that the regime for the preferential treatment of bananas would have to be abolished, the EU and its ACP partners agreed on a special framework of assistance, or SFA, to traditional ACP banana producers. The funds under the SFA were earmarked for agricultural commercialization to improve the competitiveness of banana producers, diversify the economies away from monoculture agriculture, and support private sector development in general. The SFA funds also supported the social recovery and human resource development of displaced farmers and their families and the society at large. In 2013, a successor program to the SFA known as the Banana Accompanying Measures was signed with the ACP group, including St. Lucia. The BAM is intended to consolidate on the gains of the SFA by, among other things, improving farmers' linkages to local, regional, and international markets, largely through export certification and value chain integration, as well as promoting value added through the development of agro-processing and agribusiness in local farming communities. One of the sustainable impacts achieved under these initiatives, the SFA in particular, of which we are justifiably proud, is the institutional strengthening of the then Office of Private Sector Relations, which has now received a wider mandate as St. Lucia's Trade and Export Promotion Agency. The OPSR, under the leadership of Mrs. Jacqueline Emmanuel Flood, was a worthy implementing partner for several years in the support of micro, small, and medium enterprises in St. Lucia. We are therefore very happy to see Mrs. Flood and her team carry on this valuable work. In addition to STABEX, SFA, and BAM resources, St. Lucia also receives support under the European Development Fund, directly and indirectly. In the interest of time, I will only highlight the specific support for EPA implementation executed under the 10th EDF Regional Program. The St. Lucia Trade and St. Lucia's MSMEs. The EU delegation in Barbados is currently in dialogue with the relevant representatives of the government of St. Lucia with regard to a new private sector initiative in the amount of euro 5.3 million targeting the services sector. We are hoping to have this new program approved and signed in the latter half of 2018. With the expiration of the Cotonou Agreement in 2020, Both the European Union and the members of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific Group have begun their respective reflections on the new framework going forward. An improved mechanism for closer dialogue is perhaps one of the more obvious issues for deliberations, as is the greater inclusion of private sector partners in addition to civil society to improve the planning, execution, and monitoring of development programs and projects. Any post-Cotonou agreement will have to take into consideration Brexit. The European Union anticipates the continuation of the productive collaboration with Caribbean governments under the Economic Partnership Agreement post-Brexit. Rest assured that the EU's strong commitment to the EPA remains intact, as it has always been and it will continue to be. I wish you all the best in your deliberations, and thank you for your audience.
Thank you indeed, Ms. Wildman, for this critical introduction to the EPA and for highlighting some of the key objectives, including promoting the integration of CARIFORUM states into the world economy and supporting the conditions for trade and investment. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I wish to invite Ms. Alison Francis, Services Specialist of the Caribbean Export Development Agency, to deliver some remarks.
Honorable Bradley Felix, Minister of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development, and Consumer Affairs, Mr. Titus Preville, Permanent Secretary, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ms. Camille Weidman, Project Officer, Private Sector Specialist, EU Delegation to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, CARICOM, CARIFORUM, members of the private sector, other distinguished guests here this morning, and members of the media. Good morning. Caribbean Export is pleased to host this workshop in partnership with the GIZ, the European Union, and the St. Lucia Department of Commerce here at the St. Lucia's Business Month. As most of you are aware, Caribbean Exports is a regional agency with a mandate to develop and increase exports for the region. We represent 15 member states and have recently begun implementing the Regional Private Sector Development Program under the 11th EDF. A large focus on the 11th EDF would be ensuring that firms and organizations that support them are aware of the EPA, the opportunities that exist for Caribbean producers and service providers, and how they can capitalize on these opportunities. For this reason, we are hosting this workshop, which is being streamed live across the region, and we have brought 8 firms representing various OECS countries to also participate here today. As a CARIFORUM region, we signed the Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union in 2008 with the overall objectives, some of which include the gradual integration of CARIFORUM states into the global economy and helping the private sector to transition from preferential agreements to the WTO-compatible regime. From 2010 to 2016, Caribbean Export has focused its attention on providing export development services such as training, grant financing, trade and business intelligence to SMEs and business support organizations in order to build their capacity and enhance their trade and competitiveness globally. As I previously indicated, the agency has embarked on a new regional private sector development program under the 11th EDF. The 3 main objectives which this program will seek to achieve are: 1, build private sector capacity at the firm level in order to increase export competitiveness. Under this objective, we will continue to focus attention on building private sector capacity through the increased use of green energy alternatives, ICT to foster productivity, and increasing access to sustainable financing mechanisms. The second objective is to strengthen business support organizations' capacity to provide greater support to the private sector. In this regard, we will be focusing on strengthening trade and business intelligence and research capacity within the BSOs, increasing understanding and utilization of the EPA, and other market opening agreements, building capacity of the investment promotion agencies to increase foreign direct investment, and strengthening regional and international networks. The third objective aims to strengthen regional mechanisms aimed at promoting effective public-private dialogue in order to develop a more effective enabling environment. Our efforts will include using platforms such as the CARIFORUM-EU Business Forum, which brings together the public and private sector to discuss and overcome constraints and promote business linkages. Today's workshop is focused on helping firms and BSOs to gain a better understanding of the opportunities under the EPA so that an increasing number of Caribbean products and services can enter Europe through the agreement. The EPA has guaranteed the Caribbean permanent duty-free, quota-free access to the EU market for its exports. The rules of origin of the EPA are more relaxed compared to those contained under the Cotonou Agreement. The partnership agreement makes it easier for certain goods from CARIFORUM to qualify for preferential treatment under the EPA. In addition to cumulation between CARIFORUM countries, the EU countries, the agreement provides countries with the ability to use input of materials from neighboring developing countries, such as Latin America, as long as provisions set out in the agreement are met. In a few minutes, as we go through the workshop, you will be hearing from the experts from the EU delegation based in Barbados, the Department of Commerce here in St. Lucia, TIPA, along with our Caribbean export staff, who will go through the EPA to pull out the market opportunities and to share the positive effects of the agreement. These speakers have a wealth of knowledge about the EPA, and they are here to answer your questions. We will also have some input from private sector individuals. So what's next after the workshop? I think that is critical. Over the coming months, you can expect to find more materials, videos, articles, increased use of the social media to highlight the opportunities identified under the EPA breakouts. We will also continue working on the supply side constraints, such as labeling and sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as building capacity with regard to the services sector, strengthening in-market linkages in export markets as we help our companies to trade with European Union and other markets. We'll also continue to work with the BSOs on execution of our services program, our services capacity development program, such as Services Go Global, for which a successful program was just executed 2 or 3 weeks ago here in St. Lucia, as well as the Business of Music, which was launched earlier on this year in St. Lucia. So ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to a very productive day today, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Francis. And colleagues, you may have taken note that Ms. Francis did highlight some of the objectives of the 11th European Development Fund, which includes, among others, building the private sector capacity at the firm level in order to maximize the market access opportunities of the EPA, which is hence why we have this workshop today. At this point, I now invite Ms. Virginia Paul, Head of the Trade Policy Unit of the OECS Commission, to deliver some remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Daria. Distinguished members of the head table, members of staff of the EU delegation, permanent secretary and staff of the Department of Commerce, colleagues from the OECS Commission, representative of the Embassy of France, representative of government agencies and ministries, participants from St. Lucia and the other OECS member states, invited guests, members of the media, good morning to everyone. On behalf of the Director General of the Commission of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, I also extend a warm welcome to you to this workshop. The Commission is pleased to be associated with the Department of Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development, and Consumer Affairs, Caribbean Export, and the EU delegation in convening this workshop. The OECS Commission has been providing technical and financial support to member states and enterprises to enter new markets, and so it supported its member states in their negotiations of the Economic Partnership Agreement. Soon after the EPA was concluded in 2008, the OECS Hub and Spokes project convened a series of sensitization seminars on the agriculture and market access provisions of the EPA and another on investment and services provisions. The seminars were targeted at stakeholders from the public, private, and non-government organizations sectors, and we were somewhat disappointed at the low level of participation at both of those seminars here in St. Lucia. More recently, in 2014, the Competitive Business Unit undertook study tours to Martinique and Guadeloupe in order to explore market and business opportunities for enterprises from the OECS. Since that time, the CBU has undertaken additional events in Martinique and Guadeloupe for enterprises engaged in the creative and health and wellness sectors, for example. In 2016, the Trade Policy Unit worked with the Caribbean Network of Services Coalitions in collaboration with the Chamber of Commerce of Martinique and mounted a mission to Martinique for service providers from selected sectors such as ITC and professional services. This collaboration continued with the preparation of a brochure which provides information on the services sector in the OECS. The Commission is also aware of national initiatives that have been undertaken to penetrate markets in the EU by St. Lucia and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have recognized that in order to build capacity to export to Europe, information is required, and dissemination of information on the EPA must be ongoing and targeted at different groups. We are pleased that this workshop is being convened to continue this process of outreach and capacity building. The EPA was negotiated against the backdrop of widespread acceptance that freer trade and market forces would bring growth and eventually prosperity to all. At the time, the EPA played to a political divide unresolved since the 1960s of what the best and most relevant model for Caribbean economic development should be. In doing so, it translated pre-existing ideological disputes into a pro- and anti-EPA crusade, unfortunately, that seemed to require the taking of sides rather than recognizing that the agreement and its accompanying measures involved many shades of gray. What came next was a period in which very little was achieved, so that now what we have is something close to EPA fatigue in some cases. The EPA has not acted as a signal for investment and governments as anticipated. It seems to have emerged into more technical details of commitments and implementation. And as a trade agreement, it seems to be viewed more as a tedious checklist of legal obligations in some quarters. It has not acted as a significant signal, alerting firms, entrepreneurs, and other relevant actors that each party is wide open to each other's business and that both sides welcome diverse new trading activity. The conversion of the implementation process from a checklist to a signal has been a challenge, but it should also be viewed as a huge opportunity, and which in the longer term will prove to be the main benefits of the EPA. So we really should be focusing more on the opportunities than the challenges. The EPA signal, that is the active take-up of regulatory and market challenges and opportunities in both the Caribbean and the European Union, is still struggling to be heard. Even in large markets and companies, despite a number of awareness-raising initiatives by the EU and the CARIFORUM bodies, there's a surprising lack of knowledge about the opportunities offered by the agreement, and in some quarters, lingering concerns about its potential impact. While in certain instances and states the EPA has served some sort of a signaling function, in others it has been muted by external economic shocks, such as the global economic and financial crisis, by capacity constraints in small countries such as ours, by delays in mobilizing funds, or by impasses on implementation issues within the main bodies which have been overseen and championed in the agreement. The 5-year review of the EPA indicated that despite a number of dissemination efforts by national and regional entities, there's a perception of an information deficit with respect to the rights and responsibilities under the agreement, particularly for the private sector. and with regard to the new market opportunities that have arisen under the agreement. While opinions vary significantly as to the sources of this deficit, this suggests a need for continuous awareness building, as we are doing today, and a need for more effort by enterprises to make use of the wide range of information already made available by those institutions such as the OECS, Caribbean Export, and others. It has been noted that today the CARIFORUM-EU EPA has had very little impact on trade, not as we as envisaged it. Although this has not discouraged some private sector interest in the region from exploring opportunities, trading patterns between, for example, the French Caribbean territories and the few markets within CARIFORUM has not changed substantially since the EPA was signed. On the services side, there's not been significant changes in terms of trends in FDI or trade in key sectors that could be traced back to the agreement. As regards investment and tourism flows, key indicators for the region's economies, as most of you know, both the negative impact of the global recession and the specific barriers, for example, I'm sure you recall the UK air passenger duty, have once again been the dominant factor rather than the EPA. Analysis on impacts of the agreement in specific sectors, for example in tourism, has been limited due to a lack of data on some aspects of sustainable development like poverty, labor, and the environment. There is either no measurable effect or insufficient data. So some broad measures of sustainable development, such as the Human Development Index, show a little change over the review period, as do specific indicators of social well-being, such as wage rates. Having taken stock of this situation since the entry into force of the agreement, like or loathe the EPA, the competition which we can expect from some Latin American countries makes what is on offer through the EPA or financially from the EU, as Camille has alluded to, in the way of support for reform, change, and integration, is worth using as rapidly as possible if our economies are to continue to grow. The region must continue to work on having much stronger private sector organizations, able to foster thinking about investment and accessing export markets in Europe and Latin America. We trust that the information that will be provided through today's event will create an increased understanding, provide you with an increased understanding of the rules and the an opportunity to get some information on experiences of others who have successfully penetrated the EU market. The OECS Commission's Trade Policy and Competitive Business Units, as well as the Hub and Spokes Program, remain committed to assist the governments and enterprises with EPA implementation as far as resources will allow. This will be done in collaboration with national EPA implementation units and agencies such as Caribbean Exports and the EU delegation. I hope that you find the program useful and relevant to your needs, and that you consider this a day well spent. Thanks to all who are involved in the organization of this event, and I wish everyone a productive and successful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. And I did note that Ms. Paul highlighted some of the challenges and information deficit as it relates to the coverage of the EPA, but I'm hoping upon conclusion of this workshop, all these challenges would have been rectified or eliminated and will be exporting like yesterday. It gives me great honor at this point to invite Honorable Bradley Felix, Minister for Commerce, International Trade, Investment, Enterprise Development, and Consumer Affairs, to deliver some remarks.
Members of the head table, Permanent Secretary, Deputy Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Commerce, representatives from the EU, representatives from the private sector, locally, regionally, media, personnel. Good morning. Ms. Wildman spoke earlier of the pressure of being an opening batsman, and I know we've gotten so much to think about from the head table so far, and I'm now coming in Brian Lara's position, so I could either excite you or have you sucking your teeth. Today's workshop, which brings together persons from across the sub-region who are involved in exporting or nearing the stage when they are or their firms will be exporting to the European Union, is very timely. It is timely in the sense that next month will mark 10 years since the negotiations for the CARIFORUM-EU EPA ended, and it is as good a time as any to examine how this trade agreement has performed and what can be done to make it work even better for all parties. In the case of the OECS members of CARIFORUM, we should take stock of what approaches, if any, we have taken to make the regime work for us. We should also examine what are the constraints that have frustrated our full access into a promised market. The objectives of the CARIFORUM-EU EPA are set out in Article 1 of the agreement. Among the objectives listed, two of them state as follows: supporting the conditions for increased investment and private sector initiative and enhancing supply capacity, competitiveness and economic growth, and strengthening the relations between the parties to the EPA. These two objectives, when combined, have the potential to address the vexing issues of unemployment and persistent poverty in these islands. For we continue to lag behind in terms of attracting new investment in areas apart from tourism, while we are not working as closely as we could in terms of sharing information and coordinating our national development plans and strategies. In addition, the agreement also has a development dimension. Development cooperation is supposed to take both financial and non-financial forms, and Article 8 of the agreement lists the priorities, including diversifying CARIFORUM export of goods and services through new investment and the development of new sectors. However, apart from the resources that have been provided under the various EDF and the security and predictability that the agreement has provided with respect to market access, use of the agreement in the form of attracting investment from the EU and exporting more and varied goods into the EU from the OECS has not materialized as anticipated. The range of exports from the OECS has remained broadly the same. Access to most EU markets for our service providers seeking to provide service on short-term contracts has proven challenging. Conditions in terms of varied visa requirements in individual member EU countries and local domestic regulations have made entry into a number of EU countries near impossible. There is therefore a significant gap between what is promised under the agreement and what has materialized. There is, however, need for the OECS countries to approach their engagement with the EU in a more strategic manner. Perhaps enough has not gone into building relationships and investing the requisite time in approaching the overseas territories that are part of the EU. In the case of St. Lucia, one of the approaches we undertook as far back as 2008 was to seek to have a French investor from Guadeloupe invest in a milling factory in St. Lucia. Today, the company has not only established a flour mill, but has also invested in the production of animal feed. The flour mill is a major input in the bakery sector, positioning St. Lucian bakers to provide a wider assortment of bakery products to the domestic market and the tourism sector. The investment, especially in the production of animal feed, paves the way for the development of the livestock sector, especially the pork and poultry subsectors. This investment will over time lead to an increased local production of these sources of protein, create employment, especially in the rural economy, reduce the food import bill, increase food security, and eventually become a source of new export capacity for St. Lucia. We must therefore identify the critical problems that we wish to solve in our sub-region and pursue investments that could help transform the economies of the sub-region. The EPA must be used as a catalyst to cause greater production integration within the sub-region and to drive value addition. Given our small size in terms of land mass and population, there is need for greater economic planning at the OECS level. This would lead to agreement on the initiatives that could be pursued, especially in the area of capacity building for the peoples of the sub-region. Training and retraining of our workforce must be a constant feature of our region if we are to remain competitive. As small open economies, international trade will always be the most significant component of our GDP. Competitiveness is what drives the capacity to survive in that type of environment. Finding ways to export more of our goods and services must be top of our agenda. The EPA provides some opportunities in that regard, but we must be strategic in our domestic approach to using the agreement, and we must engage the EU in a manner that leads to the conversion of market access under the agreement into effective market presence, especially for our service providers. Today's workshop provides the opportunity to gain greater insight into how to access the EU market. But very importantly, it also provides a chance to collaborate and engage each other in a more methodical manner in devising ways to build businesses that stand a greater chance to entering the market. I hope the opportunity will be taken to pursue both objectives today. Let me thank the staff of the Department of Commerce for conceiving this initiative and placing it in the context of Business Month. It is not often that one sees such a holistic approach to the development of the private sector, where most, if not all, aspects that impact business development are understood and brought together in such a near comprehensive manner as been done throughout this month. I would like to, if we could kindly give the Department of Commerce staff a round of applause. Job well done. I also wish to thank the EU delegates from Barbados, Caribbean Export, and the OECS Commission for sharing in that vision and making today's event a reality by agreeing to partner with us. I thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a productive day.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. And you did take note that the Minister highlighted some of the successes St. Lucia has had in the area of trade and investment as it relates to the EPA. And reminding us that we must be strategic in our approach in using the EPA if we are to maximize on the opportunities that have been made available under trading goods, trading services, and the other trade-related areas of the EPA. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we'll have our first presentation, which will be an overview and core elements of the EPA, whereby Mr. Ricky Jabatis, Trade Officer of the International Trade Unit of the Department of Commerce, will be delivering the presentation.